Okay, let's start. This is a presentation designed for those of Startup Ignition who were not able to attend the LeanStat conference given by Ash Mora. Now, I only attended the conference. I am no master at this. I'm still learning myself, but I did get a chance to talk with Ash during and after so we could have some personal time to understand these questions that I had a little bit more and understand the principles a little bit more. So, let's get started. One of the things that I found really interesting of what Ash explained is how businesses were made and where the advantage was. Now, you might be familiar with lean manufacturing and then the waterfall method. That's basically you come up with your design inputs and then you design, you build, and then you launch the product. Agile, change things, and then we have lean startup today. This next image really shows the difference between those. Waterfall, it is a one-stage approach, and there's a lot of inefficiencies there. Agile improved on that, but really where we see things improving today is in the lean startup method, where you are continuously going through these phases of understanding your requirements, building, releasing, market validation, etc. And so I found this very valuable. And one thing that I thought was interesting is it wasn't some group of people that decided now we're going to start doing waterfall and then they're going to start doing agile. Instead, it was the advantage that it gave them in the marketplace. Really what made the difference here is the scientific method. It allows you to implement that in each layer. And I really think of what Ash is teaching today as not only lean, but maybe even a lean 2.0 or a lean 2.1.7, because every day he seems to be continuously updating his methods and improving on them, which I find very inspiring because that's what I feel like I need to do in my own ventures. So let's talk about where to start. When it comes to starting a business, there's a lot of things to be thinking about, but the first thing to think about is a goal. And the way that Ash describes this is a minimum success criteria. Now, when you're going to start a business, you have to justify the risk to yourself, to your spouse, to the other people who you're working with, and all the stakeholders involved. It's a difficult thing. And so he recommends to think about it in terms of revenue. And even if you look at examples like Yahoo, not Yahoo, but Google, the founders of Google, they had a minimum success criteria in terms of revenue. There is actually one point when they were willing to sell their company for $1 million to Yahoo. That must have been their minimal success criteria. As an example, we're going to use a $10 million a year business as a minimum success criteria. And Ash just uses a multiplier of 5x revenue just to kind of assume the exit value. And we need to each ask ourselves, do we want a company that makes $100K a year, $1 million a year, or $100 million a year? And we need to make sure that all the stakeholders involved in our business have that same understanding, because if not, it will cause friction later on. The other thing I really liked about what Ash taught is the 3x3x3. Now, this is a way of planning in the future. Now, we're going to start looking at the 3 years, because if you look out any further than 3 years, it's really difficult. Ash says that you can get up to 5 years, but really trying to project out beyond 3 years is difficult. But that's where our first thought is. We're going to start with 3 years and think about how we're going to make our minimal success criteria within that 3 years. And there's a method for that. So you might be familiar with the lean canvas model. And so that's one piece of this. And then the other one is the traction model. And we're going to go over that in a few minutes. The other one is having a 90-day goal. And what's involved in that is always identifying the riskiest assumptions and only focusing on what's most important to the business. And that's what those riskiest assumptions are. What a riskiest assumption is it's something that if it's incorrect, it could kill your business. Now, I really like that thought, because anything else that you're doing that is not focusing on the riskiest parts of your business, you're wasting your time. You're premature scaling. And that's something that we've learned from John is super dangerous. Okay, and the last one is the lean sprint, and we're going to go over that as well. So let's first talk about this 3-year plan. Now, this is the lean canvas For most of you who are watching this is nothing new. You've seen this before. There were a couple things that I really liked from having some one-on-one time with Ash because we were able to ask him questions about a few things. The first one I want to talk about is the unfair advantage. Now, that's something that I've wondered about because I think, well, I don't really know what that is, and I try and just make up something there and put it in. But one thing that Ash said is that most teams don't start out with an unfair advantage. In fact, Facebook didn't, and many other big companies. That might be something that you grow into later. Basically, he describes the unfair advantage as your dear competitors, don't bother trying copying me because attribute. And so another way to look at this is just saying that it's a high barrier to entry. It's something that you can't buy. As an example, great content for your website. That's not something that you can just buy and do overnight. It's something that you have to develop and make sure the content works for your audience and your product. SEO would be another example. One thing he said that you should never put as your unfair advantage here is stealth, because you need to be talking to your customers. Of course, you don't want to go talk to your competitors and give them great ideas, but you need to talk to customers. That is the foundation of the lean method. So the other one here that somebody asked about is the unique value proposition. And the way that he described it is, why is your solution better than any of the existing alternatives? And the reason why I say existing alternatives here and not competitors is sometimes we think of competitors as something very direct to us, and we miss some of the existing alternatives. We'll come back to that later in the presentation. So there were a couple of other things I learned about the Lean Canvas that were new for me. The first one is that we all know that we're supposed to start with a problem, but this is still something that many entrepreneurs have an issue with, and I know that I have in the past as well. And that's because we see the problem and we're so excited about our solution, but we need to stay away from that. We really need to start with the problem and then search for that solution. We don't fall in love with the solution, we fall in love with the problem. And there's a couple of things that Ash said that we can do to do that. The first one is that each member of the team should make their separate canvas. This is to avoid groupthink, and this is to give us multiple variants of how we can attack this problem. And if we don't have around 5 when we get done with each member of the team making their own, then we should just brainstorm and come up with a couple other ideas. Once we have all these variants, it's time to start narrowing those down. And so when we start out, as you can see here, we have these 5. Then we need to start thinking of how we can start eliminating some of these. Now, there's multiple ways to do this. One way is that maybe we don't want to serve the customer segment that's identified in one of these. As an example, Ash talked about how one of his variants was serving baby boomers and the other one was serving photographers, and he chose photographers just because that was an audience that he was interested in helping. The other one is through traction model calculations, which we will be doing in a second. And then later on, these are going to be done through customer interviews or experiments that we set up, and they're going to allow us to start eliminating these. And one thing I want to point out here is that we don't start out with, we want to be the Airbnb of X. Of course, this is something that we need to look at as I'm starting with this problem, and we're going to try to figure it out. So the traction model, I really love this because it's something that helps us look at things in a fairly accurate way, but using minimal amounts of effort. So if you think about the timeline of your business, it's going to go a long time without any growth, and that's normal. That's how a startup begins. But then eventually you're going to have to get up here, and there's not really a way for us to just ramp up from the beginning because we still have to build things, we have to learn. So the way that this is done is by basically scaling each of these portions into the 3 years. So the first year, very little growth. The second year, you should be expecting to 10x your company. And then from there, you should be expected to 10x your company again. And this may seem something that's kind of wild, something that only companies like Facebook do, but that's actually not true. In fact, one of the SI members that I talked to recently, he is doing this for his business. He just 10x'd it from around $9,000 last year to $100,000 this year. So that's really exciting. So let's move forward and, I wanted to show you an example of this actually. So this is one that Ash pointed out to us, and this is what Tesla did. Their first year, they sold very few cars. And if people thought that that was how their ramp up was going to be, that would probably look like it was just going to fail. But he knew that he was going to make a Model S that was very specific, that had a small customer base, and that he could charge a lot of money for. And he was really going to focus on just making a few of those. When the Model X came out, he could ramp up things much better because he knew how to make cars. He proved that he could do it. He proved out some of the riskiest assumptions. And then the Model 3 that will be coming out, that's going to make a huge difference, and we're going to see much greater adoption. So another thing to look at in this timeline is Ash recommends that we get our launch of our MVP within the first 3 months, which seems a little crazy to people like myself who has spent a lot more time than 3 months building something. But we're going to go over that later and how that's actually possible. Before that, of course, we need to come up with an offer that we're going to give our customers. And the way that we do that is through understanding the problem, which of course is ongoing. But to begin with, we really need to understand the problem before we can start testing out our offer and then launching something. So let's build one of these. There's a software that Ash has on leanstack.com, and this is going to help us do this traction model. So I'm going to switch my screens here. Let's create this traction roadmap. So the first thing you need to think of is, how's your business set up? A direct model is, it's just a normal software as a service type company. You have companies that you sell to directly. You don't have any sort of marketplace or other players involved. So we're just going to use that, and there are some other things that he has online that he can show you how to do. Marketplaces, multi-sided. But for our purposes, we're going to keep it simple. The first thing you need to think about is your minimum success criteria. Now, we've already discussed this. In this example, we're just going to use $5 million. Okay. And then we need to think about how we're going to be doing our pricing. Now, in this example that Ash uses, he's saying, let's think of a product that is kind of like a Google Analytics, but for businesses, and it's very focused. Instead of giving you all the analytics, it's just going to give you the important ones for your business. So first thoughts are, we'll just charge $50 a month. That seems like it's reasonable. We think a lot of people will convert at that level. So great. And then we'll focus on the SaaS companies. Now, of course, this would be coming from from the Lean canvas. Okay, so we move forward. And the next thing is the lifetime value of a customer. Now, each customer is going to have a lifetime. Even when it comes to people buying cigarettes, eventually they're going to die. So there is a lifetime that each customer is going to have. Now, how long should that be? This is an assumption that we need to make at the beginning. There are a couple things that we could use. One is you can look on the internet. There's a website that Ash mentioned called CB Insights. He said that has some things that you can look up. Another thing is you can talk to investors and say, what are you looking for in this type of a company like mine? What kind of a lifetime would you expect? You could look at your current customers and see how long their average lifetime is if you already have started. You can also look at similar businesses. Facebook did this to contrast against MySpace, and we're showing that they were doing a lot better, but those numbers that MySpace was already seeing were very helpful to them. And then lastly, you can just make an educated guess. Think of the reasons why your customer will leave. Sometimes it's that there's going to be a change in staff, and sometimes it means that the job's going to be done. Ash had this where he had customers coming in, and after 6 months, his service had solved their problem, so they were quitting. Which led him to actually make better and more offerings to them. So we're going to say that it's a 3-year customer lifetime on average for these customers, which is pretty good. Now let's think about visitors and leads. So if you think about people visiting your website, what percentage of them are going to be interested in maybe trialing out your product or just talking to you or looking further into it? Now, 10% would actually be a really good number. And then from those that did the trials, another 10% is also a pretty good number. Now, that's kind of the standard is for people looking at things online having a 1% overall conversion rate, because you're taking 10% and then 10% of that. So we're just going to keep that. So now let's start looking at our attraction model. So this is all the calculations have been done, and this is what's been spat out. So if you look here, during this first year, once you launch your product, that means that you're going to have 840 leads a month. We can actually go in here and edit so you can see not just leads, but how many trials or customers. So this is saying at his rate, if he's going to make his ultimate goal here, at the very beginning, he needs to be getting around 9 customers a month. And in order to get that, that means that he has to do around 84 trials a month, and there has to be 840 leads a month. That means people coming to the website. So that's actually a lot. That could be, that to me sounds a little daunting, and for his example, he also said that for his particular product, that did seem a little difficult. Now, if we think about he wants to be making $5 million a year on this business at $50 a month per customer, then he needs to have 8,300 customers at the end of that 3-year period, and that's a lot. So his customer segment from his lean canvas said that is going to be SaaS companies. Now, as of 2016, there were only 10,000 SaaS companies in existence. Of course, this is a few years later, and this is an extra 3 years down the road. So will they be more than 10,000 SaaS companies? I'm sure there will. However, we're still expecting a very significant amount of market share, perhaps even more than 50%, which does sound not very feasible. But let's look at some other things that are important. Now, we know how many leads you need to get for every customer. So if you multiply this, then that means that he's going to be needing to get 87,000 potential customers visiting his website every month at the end of these 3 years. Well, we know that there aren't going to be 87,000 SaaS companies out there. So that just isn't looking feasible. If you're wondering why it's 87,000 and not 83,000, it's because we're calculating in churn. Now, that churn is the inverse of a customer lifetime. You can look up the equations online. So what churn means is that every month you're going to be losing customers just because for whatever reason, they've moved on to something else or no longer using your service. So if you do the calculations, at the end of these 3 years, his company would need to be adding 2,400 new customers just to flatline due to churn. And that definitely isn't feasible. So at this point, Ash explained that when he was looking into this business idea, it wasn't really going to work. It didn't look feasible. And that's the beauty of this thing. Within a few minutes, you can do a rough back-of-the-napkin estimate and figure out whether your business is feasible or not. And I actually had the opportunity to sit down with another entrepreneur, and we threw a bunch of business ideas out there. And we were able to quickly realize that just about all of our ideas were not going to work. And that did seem a little discouraging, but think about all the time that we saved. And eventually we came across one that could work really well. One thing that people have said in the past is, well, I can just change who my customers are, right? I can grow it from SaaS companies to all companies, right? And that is possible, but remember, this is a 3-year goal, and we should really, as a rule of thumb, think of how we can get to that 3-year goal with the customer segment that we want to start with. Because if not, you're crossing the chasm. If you've ever read that book, it can be useful to understand this concept. Because once you go from SaaS companies to just all companies, there is a lot that's going to change, and that can take a lot of time to ramp that up and learn, and you might even have to fork your offering into 2 separate companies. And so that is possible, but it's something to keep in mind that there can be extra complications that can add time and risk to the project. So what Ash ended up doing is quadrupling his price. He took it from $50 a month to $200 a month. And we're going to follow that example later on and understand how he was able to do it. Okay, let's get back over to the presentation here and keep moving forward. So we've talked about the 3-year plan, and once we've done that, let's move on to the 3-month plan. So in the first 90 days, we should have an objective. Now, just about all startups are going to have the same objective, and that is achieving product solution fit. And then to do that, you're going to have to think of what the key results are that you need. Now, if this is your first time running one of these planning boards that you see here on the screen, Ash recommends that you only have one objective and then 3 key results. You might be able to add more later, but to start with, let's focus on just that. Now, remember, these key results need to be customer-centric. The goal isn't to build something cool. It's to build something and then measure its impact on the customers. So the first one here is start blank customer trials a month. Now, what number should be put here? Well, we already know because we did a traction model. That traction model, we know how many customers we need at the end of this 3-month period. The next one is that the customer accepts pricing of X a month. In our example, to continue on with that would be $200 a month. You could have a range here if you've done the calculations that would support a range, but as a rule of thumb, it's probably best to just stick to a number. And then this last one is early adopter conversion rate of 80%. Now, this is interesting because we talked about before of having a conversion rate of 1%. So where's this 80% coming from? Well, if you think about it, you're going to be talking with potential customers. You're going to be really understanding their needs. You're going to have these conversations with them. You should get to the point where you can identify them well enough to convert them at a much higher rate in person. Later on, when you have this on a website and you're just hoping that as people land on it, they understand everything they need and they convert, then you should expect lower conversion rates in that 1% range. It'd be great, of course, if you could do better than that. But in-person conversion rates at the beginning should be really high. And one of the things that we're going to do is learn to ask the right questions of your customer segment, so that way you know how to identify quickly, okay, this customer does seem like it's in the right group, but it's actually not in our focus right now and probably not going to be interested. And so you can narrow those down. And Ash has talked about how within 3 questions he knew whether someone would be a customer or not. And if he knew they were going to be a customer, he could convert them at 80%. So these are real numbers here. The next thing we need to think about are our riskiest assumptions. Now, to review that, these are the things that can completely invalidate our business model. They could destroy our business if they are wrong. So let's add those in. So the first one here is that our problem assumptions are wrong. That's very common, that we think that there's a problem when there isn't. The other one is that existing solutions could get the job done. Ash said that he's seen more businesses killed by email and Excel documents than anything else because there's already a solution out there that works just fine. Lastly, that customers will not pay more than $50 a month. To continue on with the example, remember, he needed them to be spending $200 a month. And so if they're not willing to be spending $200 a month, then there's no reason for him to pursue the business because he wouldn't be meeting that 3-year goal. So the next thing to think about here are validation plans. And in the validation plans, we ask ourselves, how do we intend to achieve this goal? Now, the first one you see is customer interviews. And that's really important. We're going to be going over that. Using a Mafia offer, we're going to go into that as well. And then launching a Kickstarter campaign. I just want to take a quick second and mention that a Kickstarter campaign, I always thought of that as something you build it and then you launch it. But Ash recommended, no, you have to go and sell your product in person to multiple people and really understand how you sell it in person before you try making a campaign. Sometimes it's easier to just sit in the office and make that campaign and launch it. But a successful one is going to sell it to people first. Okay, so we've gone over that 3-month plan. Now let's go over the 3-week plan, and this is the workhorse. This is where things really happen, and that there's a lot more of the activities outside of the office. Now, I realize there's a grammar mistake on my little note here, but basically what I'm trying to say is that the goal of the lean sprint is to not just learn, but to get traction. Now, traction in this case is more customers, and that really is the ultimate measure. We're not measuring money to begin with. All startups start with pretty dismal financial sheets, but traction, the amount of customers in this case, or in other cases it might be transactions or other things, that is what's important. So we're familiar with this process. This is the build, measure, learn cycle. And this is going to happen continuously throughout your business. However, I really like it. I like to look at it linear, how Ash has it, because we're going to be doing this from time 0 to time 36 months. So let's talk about what the sprint 1 could be. It would be different for different businesses, but most likely you're going to start out with understand and define the problem. So what that means is we're looking for problem solution fit to begin with, right? So we really need to understand the problem and we need to define a solution. And once we have that, then we can start crafting an offer. So in this first sprint, we're going to focus on these first 2 things. We're going to understand the problem, and then at the end of it, define the solution. So remember, this was over here to begin with, but since we're starting our sprint 1, we're putting it here. And if you click on it, you're going to see this thing pop up, and this is to help you document the sprint. So we believe that the customer has a problem with X. This is the impetus for the business. There's a problem out there. Maybe we heard about some anecdotal accounts from people that have this issue and they're spending 10 hours a month making spreadsheets trying to solve this problem. That would be a great way to start a business. Is you see the problem, you have some anecdotal information. Now it's time to really verify if it's true or not. And so the goal that we have here is we're going to perform 25 interviews. We're going to define customer, understand that customer really well, and that's what's going to help us get these qualifying questions. And then we're going to define a mafia offer. Again, we'll come back to that. So the proposal here is, we're going to go to a place where I can find lots of these potential customers. This would be one way to get many interviews. Ash actually had a great example. He said that when he wanted to make a product that was helping entrepreneurs, he would go to these incubators and not tell them, hey, I'm starting an interview here. He would just go up and ask them, hey, I'm working on a company. When should I get investment? Or just ask questions, and people wanted to help him and they started offering solutions. And when he did that, he was able to get a lot of good information about his potential customers, which were other entrepreneurs. Now, this analysis and follow-on plans, that can't happen until we've actually done the interview, so we'll come back to that. So let's talk about how to do customer interviews. As we've mentioned before, innovator bias is really hard to shut off, and I've seen that myself. I talk to someone and I get really excited. Everything I hear them say just supports my own idea of how to solve this problem, and we need to make sure that we avoid that. In fact, sometimes we'll even invent or fake problems just to justify our solution. Of course, we don't do this knowingly, but it does happen, and Ash says that he sees this all the time. Now, if you simply ask customers what their problems are, they're only going to reveal surface problems. And that's because customers have the same issues that we have. They're very solution-based. They just want to have a solution, but they're not always thinking about the in-depth reason as to what that problem is, what it is that really needs to be solved deep down. And that's why, you guys who've had businesses, you may have seen this before, that somebody will request a feature and then you make that feature and they don't use it. Well, that's because they're really expressing that there's a problem, but they only know how to express it as, here's a solution that I want to have, which may not be the best thing for them. So there's a better way. We're going to go over it. One thing that I've read that I love, Daniel Ash showed this to me, not to be confused with Ash Mora, Daniel Ash. He recommended this book and I loved it. helped me in so many ways. The premise is, if you go to your mother and say, hey, do I have a great business idea? This is what I want to do. She's going to say, yes, of course, honey, that's fantastic. And we all know that that's something that would happen to us. But the thing is, if we are talking to potential customers, they will do the same thing. There's been so many interviews where I've been in where I say, hey, what do you think about this? They're like, oh, it's great. Do you want to buy? No, I don't need it, but I know there's so many other businesses that need it. You're going to do awesome. You're going to be a millionaire. And then I feel awesome about myself, but that isn't actually real inputs. The mom test teaches you how to phrase questions in a way that you can get correct information no matter who you're talking to. Even if you were talking to your mom and asking her about their business because she could be a potential customer someday, you can get correct information that you can actually use in the future. So I love the mom test. Ash talked about some of these methods as well. And one of the methods that he explained that I really liked was understanding the hero story. Now, the hero story is something that we are all familiar with. We just may not know to call it that. This is seen in so many books, movies, Star Wars, which is an example we're going to use. But if you look at The Matrix, Harry Potter, so many pieces of literature, you're going to see the same pattern, and that's because it really is the human story. So what the hero's journey is it starts out, of course, with a hero, and there's a problem. In the case of Star Wars, Luke Skywalker knows that the Death Star is going to blow up planets, the evil empire is going to take over, but there's a desired outcome, and in this case it's to help the princess and to save the galaxy. But unfortunately there's an obstacle in the way, Darth Vader in this case. And if you remember, Luke didn't want to do anything. He said, no, I have work to do. I'm going to stay here on Tatooine. But instead, some stormtroopers came by, blew up his house. By the way, I think it was Tatooine. If you're a Star Wars fan and you know better than me, sorry about that. Moving forward, then there was a guide, Obi-Wan Kenobi. And that guide taught him a method, in this case, using the Force to defeat Darth Vader, to overcome that obstacle. Now, think about the last time you bought something. Maybe you switched from Apple to Android or vice versa, or maybe you got a new car. Whatever it is, you went through this process. You saw that you had a problem. You had a desired outcome, but maybe you didn't know how to do it. And then if you think about it, there was some triggering event. If you're going to buy a new car, maybe your last car broke down. Maybe you went to a party and felt like you were the only one with an old car. There was some triggering event. And there was a guide to help you. Maybe you called up your friend and said, hey, how do I know to buy a new car? What kind of car should I get? Or maybe you searched it online. And when your friend may have said, oh, this is how I buy a car, and taught you a method, or maybe online you read something that taught you something. Now, this is really important because these are the steps that our customers go through. And if we talk to them like this, we can actually get them really interested in their own problem because they're telling their own hero story, and we can collect wonderful data that'll help us make great solutions to problems. Now, there's actually a great blog post that Ash made right here that you'll be able to look up, and it uses this principle to demonstrate a problem and a solution. And he said that it's one of the best responses he ever received on a blog post because of that principle. And he's actually compared this than A/B testing, where he just taught the same principles in a much more scientific left brain way, and then using the hero story did much better in the comparison. So when we're going to do an interview, we can do all of our notes on a single page, and I really like this. It's super easy, simple, and it makes sense. It does flow. So we're going to use Uber's story here. Now, if we were to interview the people that started Uber, this is kind of what we'd be getting. We'd find out that they were having an issue with transportation. That normally at home they have their own car for getting around. They don't really need anything else but that. But there was a triggering event. They were in France and they were at a party. They were 20 blocks away from their hotel. It was 10 p.m. at night. And the issue was they had a flight the next day and needed to get back as soon as possible so they could get some sleep. So they really wanted to get home in less than 20 minutes. And if you'd continue interviewing them, they would have said, well, what were my and you wouldn't say what were your consideration sets. You need to ask this in a very casual, non-formal way. But it'd be easy to ask, so, well, what did you do? What did you think about doing? What were your options? And, they realized that they could have hailed a taxi, they could have taken the metro, they could have just walked. But the problem was, if they were going to walk, it would have taken 40 minutes or even more. And so what they ended up choosing, the new solution here, is they hailed a taxi. And if you were to ask them why, they would have said, well, it was just the quickest and easiest option. All I had to do was go out and wave my hand and a cab would come over, and it would cost me 10 euros. No big deal. Well, but then there was a problem. There were no taxis on the street. It started to rain. That was really frustrating. They thought maybe, and one of the habits here that they have is they said, well, we don't know how to use the metro system. We're in a foreign country. We don't, that's a really important paradigm to understand, is their habits, because it's really difficult to break an existing habit. So there was further problems. Once they finally found a taxi, they got in, and then he refused to take them because they didn't have the right currency. And he wasn't open to taking them to a bank. He didn't accept their credit cards, and just the fact that he didn't speak English very well, he was a French speaker, that was a big problem. That's, again, a habit because it can't really be overcome. Now, if you notice, anxieties are problems. And remember, we're looking for problems to solve. And if you were to ask them at the time, of course, this is what sparked their idea that there needs to be an Uber out there in the world. But most of our customers aren't going to be doing that. And a normal customer would have said, oh, next time I should just plan ahead better. I'll carry the local currency so I can get a taxi, and, maybe I'll have a French translation app on my phone, and I'll just do that next time. But we as entrepreneurs, it's really important that we know these things, but now we can start thinking about how to solve these problems. After we do these interviews, we can start seeing groupings. We're probably not going to get the same answer from all of our interviewees. In fact, if we get answers all over the place, that means that we're probably interviewing customers that are too large of a segment. We need to narrow it down. And either way, as we start seeing this grouping, we're going to start seeing an area where we can actually help. And so look for that grouping method. And what I like about this is all of these anxieties are things that we could fix. If we were to interview more people, they could have said, one thing that I find frustrating is when you're in a taxi, you start seeing the meter go up and up and up, and that's an anxiety. One thing that Uber offers is exactly how much, within a range, how much you're going to be paying for your Uber ride before you even get in the car, which is fantastic. Now, this is a different interview method than we've used in the past. If you notice, it doesn't say on a scale of 1 to 10, would you buy this or anything like that. And that's because that's just really inaccurate. When you're asking people numbers like that, it's just so relative. It's not very useful. But here you can really understand these problems. We'll just talk about like a triggering event here. If you know where the triggering event is for your customers, maybe you can place yourself there so you can take advantage of that. He shared one example of how people don't sell homes during December because everybody's too focused on Christmas. But it turns out that this one company did a lot of research, and that's when a lot of people were actually thinking about buying a home. With their interviews, they understood that there was a triggering event. People were coming over for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and they didn't have enough room, and they thought, man, we need to buy another home. Well, that was that company's opportunity to start capitalizing on this triggering event. And they were able to sell a lot more homes in the spring because they were in contact with these people right when they were starting to think about, I need a new home. So let's move on here. Okay, so now we're going to make the assumption we've gone out, we've done our 25 interviews, and we've already learned these things. Now we've already talked about these things, trigger points, anxieties, those things. So now our follow-up plan, it could be one of two things. In this example, of course, maybe we need to do more customer interviews so we can better understand, better focus, or maybe we feel like it's time to start moving forward. And the way that we move forward, we don't build anything yet. We're going to test a Mafia offer. So now let's get into, we're going to be getting into that in a second. So in the sprint 2, in this example, we're going to say, we've done our interviews, it's time to start moving forward and working on this offer. And this is where the rubber hits the road. This is super important, and there's actually a great video on how to do an offer. I included the link up here, and that is, and by the way, if you're watching this video on YouTube, they're not going to be links here, but at the end I have a place where you can download a link to these slides, and that's where you can have access to all these links. So the offer contains three components: the unique value proposition, the demo, and the pricing. So if you think about the unique value proposition, this is, of course, what your product has to offer. Ash stressed that we want to make sure that we're focusing on old problems, not new problems. And what he means by that is, when the MP3 player came out, it was better than the CD player. The job that needed to be done was people wanted to listen to music, and the MP3 player was better. Now you went from having 20 songs in your pocket, or 20 songs into, I guess you couldn't really fit a Walkman in your pocket, but now you went from just those 20 songs on a disc to 1,000 songs in your pocket. And so that was better. And now what's the next iteration of that? Maybe it's that we have YouTube, or that we can just tell Alexa to play any song we want. But if you realize there, it's the same problems just being fixed in a better way. And we're actually going to use an example from Steve Jobs to understand how this works. So when he did a presentation, that's what this video is about. This presentation was about the iPad. And what did he say the iPad could do? He showed how it was good at doing photos. Not only good, but it was better than photos before. It's just so intuitive. It's beautiful. You can do emails. It's so easy to do the emails. You could be laying in bed and just grab your iPad, because it's such an intimate device, and just start typing up your email. You could browse the web. You can watch videos. You can listen to music, play games, read ebooks. These, again, are problems that people already know how to solve, but he's doing it better. And one way that he's showing that it's better is he's directly comparing it to a competitor, and that was the netbook, which he definitely was very disparaging on and said the netbook is not a great product. We are so much better than them. The netbook is larger, it's slower, the display isn't very good. We have a beautiful display. You can't take a laptop in bed. Your spouse is going to kick you out. It's uncomfortable. It's just a cheap laptop. Now the iPad is different. And then he went into his demo. And if you look at his demo, it's very real. I don't know one way or the other whether that was a fully functional iPad or not. Most likely it wasn't. It definitely wasn't out on the market yet. But our demos should look very realistic. Ash says that he believes that we can make our demos look so real that the customers think that it's a working product, which is great. Now again, a demo should only be 2 or 3 minutes. It's something that we can quickly show our customers. If we're doing a training session, we're doing it wrong. Now, in the Steve Jobs example, he's spending an hour on stage, which is it's a different setting than we're going to be in for our customers. The last one is pricing, and this is super important. Remember how we talked about in Ash's example that he was going to be selling something for $50 and then realized that he moved it up to $200? That seemed hard to swallow. And that was probably very true for Apple at the time when they were launching the iPad. So how did they talk about pricing? Well, they did what's a method called price anchoring. So again, the netbook was their competitor. And remember, he's been comparing his product against the netbook this whole time. He's been disparaging against the netbook. This is his chance to make a comparison with pricing. So, and at the time, he said that there was people recommending that he sell his product for $9.99. And Ash said that the netbook was being sold for a similar price at that time, which may be true. I haven't researched that yet. But Steve Jobs starts talking about how his goal was to put this in the hands of many people, that they had a really aggressive pricing goal to keep it down. And the netbook cost $999. And everybody thinks that he should charge the same thing, but his goal was less. And he's only going to sell this product, an amazing product, for $4.99. And the room goes into applause. Now, I didn't do a great job presenting that. If you watch the video, you can see how he does it. He's definitely a master. But the fact that he got an applause when he said $4.99 is fantastic. That means that he did it right. And now, what should we be charging? What should our unique value proposition be in our demo? What should it look like? That's all should be coming from our customer interviews. Now, we're going to be taking this offer to more customers and testing this out. And the great thing is people either accept or reject the offer. Maybe at this stage they can only do a letter of intent, but maybe there's other things like they sign up for a trial, or if you have some way to service them in any other way even faster, that'd be great, because this has to be very binary. You either say you came away with a very positive response, or a yes or a no. So in the case of the LOI, you come away with the LOI. If you don't, then it's a fail. And that's really important because we need to be able to measure it. We can't just keep telling ourselves it's going to get better. They are going to convert. They're going to go talk to their boss. No, it needs to be a yes or a no. So let's look at, let's go back to this 90-day goal. So remember, we already completed our sprint 1, and our sprint 2 is this offer. Now, the Mafia offer just means that it's an offer you can't refuse. That's what Steve Jobs did, right? No, this isn't going to be $1,000. It's only $500. It was just an offer that people couldn't refuse. Now, this first offer should be an experiment. Now, you can actually create an experiment here. And let me see. I think I have a document. We'll come back to that. So, a couple things when it comes to experiments is, if you're not doing experiments, you're doing a see what stick strategy, which doesn't work. It just is too time consuming, and you're not taking directed moves. Now, we're not going to go into all these effective habits of experiment making. There's actually a link here where you can read more about this. I think it's fantastic. But one thing that's really important is we need to declare the outcomes as a team from the beginning. And the reason why is we need to have a falsifiable hypothesis. So this is the experiment report. What I love about Ash's methods is you do have a report. Things are written down very clear, but they're also very easy. You don't need to be writing paragraphs and paragraphs. These can be captured in just a few sentences, or if not, just a couple incomplete statements in each box, and that can communicate what you're doing. So, you're going to give some background, your hypothesis that needs to be falsifiable, that you can say yes or no, we made it at the end of this. And so this is what you put to begin with, and then you run your experiment, and then you can fill out the rest of this sheet. Now, he gave an example in class. He said that, okay, the falsifiable hypothesis was that in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to sign up 200 leads using X method. Now, notice that there's 2 weeks there, so you have a time frame. There's an exact number, and there's a method described. That's important. Now, he said that at the end of those 2 weeks, they only signed up 130 customers. Remember, the goal was 200. So does that mean that the experiment failed or the experiment succeeded? I'll give you a chance to think about that. And the answer was that Ash would consider it a pass, that he passed, that he did not have, that his hypothesis was not proven incorrect. Now, how is that possible when it was only 130 and not 200? Well, remember, we're doing things that we're taking guesses. We're making educated guesses, but they're not going to be exact. And so it was still within an order of magnitude. Maybe in order to get those 200 results next time, there's some things that can be tweaked. And maybe in the next experiment, this next action here, as you see, they'll have a way to improve that a little bit. And that would come from the validated learning. They might recognize that there was some sort of issue that they could have improved on. So think about things in terms of order of magnitude. Okay, so let's try to continue moving forward. We need to get to the rest of this, and the next step would be the MVP. So what is a minimal viable product? Now, this is something that we know all the way back from the days of Steve Blank, but there's so many definitions here. There's there's kind of been some confusion in the entrepreneurial world, and this is what Ash says is an MVP, and I really like this. There's a Release 1.0, Concierge, and the Wizard of Oz. So Release 1.0 would be something that you can easily launch. Maybe you have a very simple product, you can just get that up very quickly. That would be a Release 1.0. The Concierge method is something I really like because it's something that I've seen that I could probably do in some of my companies, where we have something that we can give very specific, we can give help, hands-on help to our customers and still provide that value. Our customers don't care if we have, a fancy system to do it, as long as we're giving the results. So we can do this more as almost like a consultant. In fact, one thing that Ash said is you can start out as a consultant to become the first user of your solution. That can be a great way to start a business. You just have to be careful to not fall in love with the consultant wages, because you can obviously charge more if you're a consultant. The last one is the Wizard of Oz, which, as we remember from Wizard of Oz, there was just a man behind the curtain pulling all the levers, right? Same thing. We can offer this product, and in the background we're doing it all by hand, but to the customer it looks real. This is a great way to provide value to begin with. And this is why Ash said that you can actually launch with an MVP in less than 90 days. And if you look at what your solution is and you say, this is only going to take 2 months of programming, let's just wait that 2 months. Well, as we all know, that 2 months becomes 4 months, then becomes 6 months. The problem is we are strapped for time. We're not strapped for cash as entrepreneurs, we're strapped for time. And so looking at things in this way, we can really narrow down the scope to launch something that's going to add value up front. And so even if it takes us a little bit more brain power to think of how we can get our scope really focused, it's super valuable and definitely worth the time. And I actually apologize. I never finished this slide, but it's something that I added last minute because there's a couple things I wanted to talk about here. First of all, with the MVP, is we don't want to try to get a lot of customers. We actually want to be really focused. Ash said that we shouldn't be telling people that we are going to get them in the MVP or a beta program, because that's like asking for forgiveness. It's saying that we have just an okay product. We have some solution to their problem, so we need to make sure we approach it like that. And one thing you can say is that this is to get early access. We're doing early access. We're interviewing 100 companies, and we're only going to be selecting 10 for early access. Not 90, not everyone who wants to. We're only going to be selecting 10. So, and those first 10, they're going to get the concierge treatment. I will personally be your consultant. My team and I will be there every step of the way to help you get the results you need. If you don't get the results you need, you'll get your money back. This is a great opportunity, right? Another thing that Ash talked about here is that we're going to be presenting our MVP, and so we need to choose a comparison. Now, if you remember in his example, he originally thought he could only charge $50 a month for this product, but he realized he needed to charge $200 a month for this product in order to make a successful business, according to his own criteria. So when he talked to people already said, well, why would I pay $200 a month on this when I could be using Google Analytics for this and solve the same problem? Google Analytics is free. Well, of course, if they make that comparison, then he's in trouble and he's not going to be able to make the sale. Or, it would be making a sale at this point because it's an MVP. So we have to make sure that we create the comparison. He established this early on the conversation when he asked them, do you have this problem? They would say, yes, we do. How is it that you're solving that? We're putting together some analytics from Google Analytics, and we're taking this time and we're making spreadsheets. And so we're making spreadsheets and we're spending $20 or 20 hours a month working on this. And once he gets that information out of them, now he has something to anchor against. And so if they're spending 20 hours a week working on this, if you think about that, that's $50 an hour. And so they're spending $1,000 a month. And that's for an average rate, right? If we think about what we're spending, what we should be charging for our own work, $50 an hour is a rough estimate, or at least for a programmer, $50 an hour. So he's telling them, look, you're already spending $1,000 a month on this. My product is only $200 a month, and you're going to be getting even better stuff. And your time is so valuable as an entrepreneur. You can use that time to build this, get more customers. And when he was able to price Anchor against this, he was able to do much better with his customers. So I think that's really, those are a couple valuable lessons on how we present this MVP. Okay, so we've come to the end of the presentation. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. A couple things I want to point you to. First of all, if you follow this link, there's a Dropbox files that you can download that have some things that have to do with this presentation, including a copy of the presentation and some of those documents that you saw here. I recommend a couple different things. Ash gave us a link to the Slack community where people can ask him and his team questions. And then the next thing is leanstack.com. You saw me use this during the presentation. I think it's a fantastic place where you can use tools, read more articles, watch videos, and it's constantly being updated. Thank you for attending.